I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to look at an interesting way to create unusual sequences. What I've done here is to program a little beat for an ultra beat kit using a step sequence. It's called the Minimal Electro Kit, and the little groove that I've programmed sounds like this. Okay, now the other things that I've got within this track sound like this. I'm going to just mute out that for a moment, and I'm going to have a listen to the other parts. So normally, if I had a part like this and these other parts going on, of course the temptation would be to think, well, just run them all together. I could do that. But what that's giving me is a kind of techiness that I don't really want within the piece. What I like about this little minimal electro groove is the sort of sparseness of the beats, but I don't really like their super spiky techno quality. What I want to do is to take the groove that I've programmed and use it in some way on another sound in order to kind of make the feel of that pattern become part of my production. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Space Designer, and I'm going to turn this beat loop into an impulse response. Now then, let's just understand what Space Designer is for a moment and what an impulse response is. So Space Designer is one of Logic's reverbs, and it's a convolution reverb. What it does is to use recordings of real spaces, allowing you to wrap a sound in that space, convolve it, as we refer to that process, and then use it within your mix. And of course, most of the time, what you're going to want to do is to use the spaces that exist out in the world. If you want a kind of cathedral sound for your piano part or your strings or another part within your project, then of course, what you're going to want to do is to go and find a real sounding acoustic space and apply it to your sounds. But we can do interesting things with Space Designer, including importing any audio file. And it stands to reason that if we import something which has got a kind of rhythmic component, that might do quite interesting things for the sounds within our production. So what do I need to do in order to turn this into an impulse response? Well, impulse responses are audio files. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is to turn this little programmed pattern into an audio file. And the way that I'm going to do that is to bounce it in place. I'm going to control-click this region. I can see that bounce in place is right up here at the top. If it's not there for you, come to bounce and join and you'll find it here instead. And what I can then do is just call this anything I like. I'm actually going to call it IR beat, impulse response beat. And what I'm going to do is to just press OK. Now, hopefully Logic is going to have put that into the folder for this particular project, because I can now see that I've got an audio file. Here it is within my project. It's been created and it's been set up on a new audio track. Now, actually, that's not where I need it. I'm going to mute this part. What I'm going to do instead is to come down to this little sequence sound that I've lined up here. And what I'm going to do is to open up Space Designer. Now, as we've already established, Space Designer is one of Logic's reverb plugins, so that's where I'm going to find it. So within Space Designer, if I open up the stereo option here, what I can then do is to come up to the library of options, or at least the area where the impulse response for the current sound is loaded. I can click here and I can load an impulse response. Now I can see that what I'm replacing is the default choice, which is called large and bright. And you can see that next to it, just in case you're using Space Designer in a more traditional way, you'll see the length of the reverb that's been captured within this sound. This is a 1.8 second large and bright, apparently, space. And by employing it on a sound like the one I've got lined up here, we can hear the reverb very clearly. So I'm going to replace this impulse response by clicking here and coming to Load Impulse Response. What I'm then going to do is to browse to my file. My project is in here, so I'm going to just jump in here, come and find the project that I'm working on into audio files, and there's my impulse response beat, and I'm going to open it. And what's going to happen is that Logic's going to just take a moment, and then it's going to load in this audio file. Now, I can see that there's definitely a rhythmic component to this. Hopefully it's my groove, I'm sure it is. I can see all of the little transient moments within this groove. So what happens now when I play my sound through this reverb? Well, a couple of things are happening here. It's worth bearing in mind that at the moment, because I've set Space Designer up on an insert channel of my track here, I'm going to get all of the dry signal and the wet signal as if it were a traditional reverb too. So we're still going to hear the synth that's playing it, the EFM1, but we're then going to hear the reverb after it. And remember that reverb now is actually a beat loop. And I have to learn how to play in time. Now at the moment, because the beat loop that I sampled or turned into an impulse response is 4 bars long, we're hearing an awful lot of it because every time I play a note, it triggers the whole of that pattern. So what we can now do is to start to use the parameters available to us to do some interesting things. And in particular, what we've got a chance to do is to change a couple of key parameters. At the moment, do I need all 4 bars of this pattern to happen? Well, no, not really. I could use a much shorter section. So the first thing I'm going to do is to adjust the length of my impulse response. I'm going to do some very basic maths here. Let's suppose I wanted half of it. Well, if the whole length is 6.86 seconds, then certainly, I don't know, 3.4-ish feels like it will be about half that groove. So let's see where we get to with that. Now, when I do that, you can see that what begins to happen is that Logic is kind of reimagining now this impulse response. Rather than simply sort of selecting just the first half or producing a volume envelope over part of this groove, actually what's happened is it's reconvolved this signal, which means that effectively what we've now got is something which is just a shorter impulse response. It's kind of recalculated it. Now, if I actually look at the audio file that I created, I can see that because of the way that it was bounced, the audio file itself is actually a little bit longer than the 4 bars in question, which means that I think that is the very end of my groove. I'm going to just shave a little bit more time off this and see if we can sort of get rid of that little bit of audio on the end, or use that as a means by which to kind of trigger the groove overall. So let's see what this sounds like now. Okay, so now it's stopping a little earlier, and that's working out well. That's absolutely fine. Now, we've got our overall shape here, but at the moment, what I can see that of the volume envelope options available, at the moment, I'm really only using a tiny part of that. I can see that the volume shape for the way that this sound is going to decay is set in a very immediate, obvious way. What I'm going to do is to actually use the decay options to get rid of some of this a little bit more quickly, so that effectively what we're doing is shaping just the very beginning of the file. And in addition to just using the volume envelope to kind of shape the way that the back end of the sound is going to sort of behave, what I can also do is to do the same thing with the start as well. I'm just going to sort of pull around the attack time, sort of maybe aiming for this sort of second transient. So rather than an immediate start, we've got a much less immediate one. And in addition to my volume envelope, I've also got a filter envelope, which I'm going to engage as well. So that what I can now do is to start playing around with tone shaping as well. I can see that I've got a couple of kind of breakpoints here where I can pull things around and sort of create a tonal shape, which is going to be hopefully sort of shaping this sound a little bit as well. And I can make that resonant if I want to. So the filter that's being used here, I'm going to just increase resonance a little bit. I can actually choose a different filter shape altogether if I want to. Let's just try the bandpass option for a moment. Okay, it's a little bit spikier, I like that. So what I'm going to do is just to slightly bring down these 2 points. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of what I might be able to do within my mix? Well, let's play a sequence in, and then we'll quantize it and see what we've got. Okay, so I've got a pattern there, and what I'm going to do is just get that in time, because for obvious reasons, what I want to do is to make sure that I'm triggering the pattern that I've recorded in time. And there's one note that I played that I don't like as well, which I'm just going to change, which is this little D flat here. I'm going to put that back up there. Okay, so we've got a little pattern here. Now, one other thing that I might choose to experiment with is the size dial. Now, effectively, what this does is to control the size of the impulse response, not its length, but its size. And if I was to change this as a sort of direct multiplication of the original size, well, I think something interesting might happen. So now what we've got is this kind of halftime feel. So it sort of stands to reason that if I went the other way and took it down to 50%, we'll get a double speed kind of impulse response, ghost rhythm as I like to call it. And actually that feels like it's rushing a little bit. Let's just slightly increase the size there. So effectively what we've got here is a different kind of way of sequencing. And in fact, in this video, that's kind of what we've done. We've set out from the beginning to try and achieve a different kind of a sound. Think about the ways in which you normally achieve a sequenced sound. You might sort of set up a short little spiky synth and play the notes in, or you might rely on delay in order to just kind of create some rhythm. Well, this is a totally other way of doing that, a way of taking a rhythm, turning it into an audio file, and then importing it into Space Designer to create this really interesting kind of ghostly approach to rhythmic pattern creation. And even though the parameters that we've got over how we might shape it in terms of playback speed or filtering or the volume envelope may feel a little bit more limited than we might find in other sort of outlets for how we might process sounds. Nevertheless, what we've got here is something that sounds pretty unique, I think.